did you come to Kazakhstan? That was probably the question I heard most during my trip, and honestly, I understand the surprise. For many people, Kazakhstan is still an unknown country, lost between Russia and China, far from the classic tourist routes. But after spending time here, I understood that this lack of tourism is part of what makes the experience different. Upon arriving in Almaty, the first thing that surprises you is the Russian atmosphere that still dominates much of the city. The Russian language is heard constantly. Many buildings retain a rather heavy Soviet architecture, and some neighborhoods seem more culturally connected to Russia than to the traditional image that many foreigners have of Central Asia. It is also very noticeable in the people. Compared to Tashkent, Almaty clearly has a much larger presence of people with Slavic features, especially Russians and Ukrainians. Officially, Russians make up about 18 to 20% of the city's population, one of the largest Russian concentrations in all of Central Asia. At the same time, the majority of the population remains Kazakh, with Turkic roots and typical Central Asian features. There is also a quite visible Uyghur community and a Korean minority inherited from the Soviet deportations. In practice, walking through Almaty, the visual impression is even more mixed. Personally, it gives the impression that the Slavic cultural and aesthetic presence could feel close to 30 or even 40% if you include many mixed Russian Kazakh families where Slavic features predominate. On some avenues, in cafes or shopping malls, at times it feels more like a modern Russian city than a Central Asian capital. And something else that is quite striking is the country's female beauty. For those who admire both Slavic beauty and Central Asian features, Kazakhstan seems to strike a very unique balance between both worlds. In cities like Almaty, that cultural and ethnic mix creates a very visible physical diversity on the streets. Between Slavic, Asian, and Eurasian features, the country conveys a constant sense of elegance and sensuality that many travelers end up commenting on after visiting the region. In Tashkent, however, the atmosphere changes quite a bit. There, Central Asian and Turkic profiles predominate much more, especially Uzbeks. Although both cities share a Soviet heritage, the human and visual feel is not exactly the same. That contrast between Almaty and Tashkent makes traveling through the region even more interesting. However, Kazakhstan is not simply another post-Soviet country. The country has a huge ethnic mix. More than 100 ethnic groups have lived here for generations. Kazakhs, Russians, Koreans, Uyghurs, Uzbeks, Ukrainians, Tatars, and many more. The interesting thing is that, at least visually and in daily life, there seems to be a fairly peaceful coexistence between different communities. On the streets, in the markets, and on public transport, that mix feels natural. Historically, this entire region was united for decades within the Soviet Union. Countries like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan shared many political, economic, and cultural structures. Russian became the common language for millions of people and still remains essential today for traveling through much of Central Asia. In fact, one of the first difficulties for many tourists is precisely the language. Outside of some modern cafes, hotels, or university students, English remains quite limited. Local restaurants, train stations, or small shops speaking Russian helps a lot. Even using a translator, conversations sometimes end up mixing gestures, smiles, and improvised words. It is curious that many locals seem genuinely surprised to see foreigners sightseeing here. Several times I heard questions like, "Why did you choose Kazakhstan and not another country?" Some even seemed proud that someone was interested in showing their country to the world. That kind of interaction creates quite human moments that are increasingly hard to find in mass tourist destinations today. If you enjoy these kinds of trips off the beaten path, leave a like, share the video, and subscribe, because on this channel we keep exploring lesser known countries that almost no one shows in depth. Another thing that really stands out is the Russian economic influence that still exists in the country. After McDonald's left Russia, Vkusno i Tochka appeared, a chain that serves as a Russian alternative to the famous American restaurant. Seeing these types of brands shows the extent to which Kazakhstan remains culturally and economically connected to the Russian world. But at the same time, the Chinese presence is also becoming increasingly noticeable. On the streets of Almaty, many modern Chinese cars are appearing, especially SUVs and recent electric vehicles that barely existed here a few years ago. For someone who travels through Europe frequently, the change is quite visible. China is increasing its economic presence throughout Central Asia, and Kazakhstan seems to be becoming a strategic piece between Asia and Europe. Getting around the region is also part of the adventure. The trains are not particularly modern compared to Japan or Western Europe, but they are surprisingly comfortable for long trips. An overnight sleeper train journey between Almaty and Tashkent can take around 16 hours and cost approximately €50. Sleeping while slowly crossing the Central Asian steppes has something special that flights can never offer. Mind you, crossing borders here can still feel quite Soviet. Between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, border checks can last between 1 and 2 hours depending on the time. Baggage checks, stern officers, long waits, and strict procedures are very reminiscent of certain Russian or post-Soviet border crossings. Especially on the Uzbek side, the control can feel quite rigid for European travelers accustomed to quick borders. There are also small details that show international tourism is still developing. In some tourist restaurants, for example, the menu is only in Russian, and when they find out you speak English or are a foreigner, sometimes certain prices seem to magically adjust with a small increase of 2 or 3 euros. It does not happen everywhere, but it is something some travelers end up experiencing. Even so, those very situations make traveling through Kazakhstan feel less artificial and more spontaneous. There are still unpredictable moments here, real conversations, and a sense of discovery that has almost disappeared in many famous destinations. And that is probably what surprised me most about Kazakhstan. It does not constantly try to impress the tourist. The country simply exists with its contradictions, its Soviet heritage, its rapid modernization, and its identity mixed between Asia and Russia. And if you want to keep discovering lesser-known countries, different cultures and corners away from mass tourism, subscribe and watch the other documentaries on the channel about Central Asia and the former Soviet world.